Good morning. It's good to see each and every one of you, and it's a real pleasure to be here and delight to see such a large audience. I'm real grateful. As you heard, I spent most of my career, as what I like to say, at the happiest place on earth, and so I went from the happiest place on earth to the busiest place on earth, Walmart, but I'm totally enjoying it. Let me ask, just by a show of hands, how many of you have been to a Disney theme park? Have you been to? Okay, for those of you that didn't raise your hands, I'd like to see you after my presentation. She's looking at me real seriously. I'm still dependent on Disney for retirement, so. No, just a joke. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I've been saying on and off over the past couple of hours that, working for Walmart, I get invited to meet and present at a lot of events around the world, and unfortunately I have to say no to most of them, but there's a reason that I said yes to this one, and that's because I wanted to be here. I wanted to get to know you. I'm really impressed with some of the work the university is doing and some of the work that you're doing to create an undergraduate focus on food safety. Very, very insightful, very important, and so I wanted to come hear more about that, and I've been very pleased with what I've learned. But on to my topic. I've been asked to talk to you about global trends in food safety, and the reason I was asked to do that is because of my unique nature. I happen, and I share this humbly, to work for the world's largest retailer. We are told that we buy and sell more food than anyone else in the world. And with that comes a very daunting responsibility. And with that also comes a unique vantage point. We see the world maybe a little differently because we buy and sell so much of it. So what I was asked to do is just share some key trends. I could have literally spent 2 hours talking to you about important trends in the global food system, but I'm going to share with you 6 trends that I thought were pretty important, although there's more. But we'll talk about these, and then afterwards we'll hopefully do a little bit of Q&A, okay? Now, people say, Frank, you like to think of yourself as a bit of a food safety futurist, and it's a compliment to me because I do like to spend a lot of time thinking about the future. The one thing I've learned is that to be a good futurist, you have to understand and learn from the past. And so I thought, let me begin with a little history lesson. So it'll take me about 60 seconds. But I wanted to give you the history of food processing. Okay, in 60 seconds. We'll go pretty quick. And at the beginning of time, up to about 2000 BC, man, and I use the term man affectionately to refer to both genders, was mainly a hunter-gatherer for many, many years, right? Go out and hunt this food, and then they come back and say, here, eat this food quickly before it spoils. We weren't too concerned about food safety, right? We were just concerned about getting food on the table, not even on the table. Around 500 BC, man said that food spoils fast. Here, let's salt it. And we have in the literature our first hints of early preservation techniques. Around 1845, man said that salt tastes bad. Here, place that food on ice, another form of preservation. Around 1850, man said that ice melts fast. Here, let's place that food in a refrigerator. Now, they're not the types of refrigerators that you and I have at home. It's not a GE refrigerator. But they were units that contained blocks of ice, early form of refrigeration. Around 1864, the science begins to evolve with the work of one of my heroes. I don't have a lot of heroes in life. I have 3. And one of them is Louis Pasteur. And man said that food still spoils. Here, let's pasteurize it. And now we can have food last a little bit longer and get rid of foodborne pathogens. Around 1980, the science takes a quantum leap. And man and scientists said that pasteurized food doesn't last long enough. Here, let's irradiate it. You can now have shelf-stable food for 40, 50 years. 1997, man says in some consumer groups that irradiated food is bad for you. Here, eat this all-natural fresh stuff. And at the turn of the century, man says that all-natural fresh stuff goes bad. Here, eat this food quickly before it spoils. That's all you need to know. Now, your advisory council here was telling me it seems like we're going back to where we started and we're forgetting the lessons learned in the past. It's intended to be humorous, but there's a lot of truth to this, students, lots of truth. And we've seen outbreaks because people want to consume unpasteurized milk, forgetting the lessons that we've learned about pasteurization. We've seen outbreaks and deaths with children because mom thought she was doing something good by giving her children unpasteurized fruit juices. And we've seen pressure on you in the industry to say, hey, we want minimally processed products. We don't want preservatives. We don't want any harsh treatments. And that represents challenges to food safety. Now let me ask you a question, be a bit provocative. Are we winning the battle against foodborne disease? I feel this is very much like a classroom setting, so are we winning the battle against foodborne disease? Yes or no? Yes, somebody said yes. Somebody says no. Maybe. We got a lawyer in the room. It depends. Or a politician. There is no question that we've won big battles against foodborne disease and infectious diseases. And here's a curve that shows deaths due to infectious diseases over the 1900s. And you can see this dramatic drop in fatality rates associated with infectious disease, largely due to measures of food safety, but not just food safety, chlorination of water, pasteurization of food, hygienic standards. It's interesting here, I would imagine the professors know this, but what happened here in 1918, students? Yeah, Spanish flu, right? 1918, high mortality rate, affected about 3-4% of the global population with about a 10% fatality rate, lots of deaths. But other than that, we've made great progress in the battle against infectious diseases. And in fact, if you look at some of the organisms that our forefathers were concerned about in food safety, these were things that you saw on the list. Brucellosis, cholera, hepatitis, salmonella. This is data from 1900 to 1939. What's missing on this list? E. coli, 0157 and enterotoxigenic E. coli. Somebody says listeria. What else is missing? Listeria. I don't see norovirus up here. I don't see Campylobacter. And what else do we know about microbes? Well, you saw a dramatic decline in typhoid. This is salmonella infections between 1920 and 1997. What happened to non-typhoid serotypes? They started increasing. And see, we know that microbes have a way of adapting, and when you win one challenge or battle, there is another one that emerges. And in fact, you don't have to look very far. Just at the beginning of the 21st century, what do you see? Two of the largest outbreaks ever recorded in the history of the world. The cantaloupe outbreak with listeria and cantaloupe deaths, Rocky Ford cantaloupes. And then we had an E. coli outbreak 0104 in Germany. It was the largest E. coli outbreak documented in the history of the planet with 53 deaths. And so yes, we're making great progress, and we've made great progress in the battle against infectious diseases, but what are we seeing? Some landmark outbreaks, and so things are changing. Let me ask the question a little differently. Are we currently winning the battle against foodborne disease? More current context. Are we currently winning the battle against foodborne disease? Lots of silence. Well, here's our best progress report. The best scorekeeper for this in the United States is the CDC with FoodNet data. Many of you will know what this data means, but these are the organisms. And CDC tracks cases of foodborne illness over 100,000 people. And you can see 13.8 cases in 100,000 US population. The healthy people goal of 2020 is 8.5. You can see E. coli, 1.15 cases per 100,000. The goal is 0.6. What do you notice here? I see no smiley faces. Do you see any smiley faces? They're all sad or neutral. And so the CDC tells us that if you look at foodborne disease statistics over the past decade, we're pretty flat. Pretty flat. We're not making great progress in the battle against foodborne disease in more recent terms. Clearly over the 1900s we made great progress, but it seems like things have plateaued. And what does that tell us? That tells us that the battles that we've won against foodborne disease that have brought us to the 21st century, 2015, and the strategies and the techniques that we've used are not necessarily what we have to do to make our healthy 2020 goals. Does that make sense? It's not the same old plays, and so we do need to do things differently, and we need to innovate. And so if you ask me, I love this quote that says, "A problem well defined is half solved." It's not that the food system is terribly unsafe, it's just what we've done to get us to this point. The challenges of the future are different, and they're going to require different solutions. And so that's really the message of me sharing with you 6 trends, okay? And so I'm going to walk through 6 trends and talk about what they mean to food safety. So there's a changing food system. That doesn't surprise anyone. I told you right at the beginning that at the beginning of the time, Man was mainly hunter-gatherer. Clear archaeological evidence that people used to hunt foods. And so you can't see it here, but there's some stick figures chasing foods with spears. We had then domestication of plants and animals. Generally, villages formed around water. You know that. You fast forward to the early 1900s. What do you have? The industrial farming revolution. People able to produce more food to feed a growing population. And so this is farming in middle America in the early 1900s. This is a beef slaughter facility, early 1900s in Canada. I doubt they were too concerned about E. coli 157. I doubt they had a HACCP plan. And this is what I call the first retail supercenter. Doesn't look like a Walmart, but this was a couple of hundred square feet in Chicago, early 1900s. All shelf stable, not a lot of different product offerings. Fast forward to today, and what does retail look like, or the food system? Well, you guys are familiar with this. You have a Walmart in town, don't you? 2. The retail supercenter, where you have hundreds of different food products, 100,000 square feet. You have frozen products, fresh fruits and vegetables, by the way, year-round, locally sourced products, fresh meat and poultry, retail looking a lot like food service, home meal replacement solutions. Look at the complexity of today's food system and today's retail establishment. And I like to say, hey, people are critical of today's modern food system. You bring somebody forward from the 1400s or the 1500s and you drop them in a supercenter today, and they're not going to be real critical of today's modern food system. They're going to say, you guys are spoiled. You all live like kings. Oh my goodness, right? There's a lot of benefits to today's modern food system, although there's some risks and we have to manage them. Fresh fruits and vegetables year-round. I like to tell the story because I love blueberries. I really am a blueberry fanatic. I eat blueberries every week, sometimes multiple days out of the week. But there was a time in my life when I could only eat them one time a year. Guess what? I eat blueberries now every month of the year because of the global food system. In the 1800s, it's reported in the literature that a typical retail store had about 15,000 SKUs, 15,000 different food items. How many different food items do you think exist in a retail establishment today? Anybody want to take a guess? 25,000 I heard? 40,000? Greater than 50,000. So you think about it. You walk into a grocery store or a supercenter, there's over 50,000. It's higher than that now in most Walmart stores. And then think about the way the world is changing. We were talking last night about e-commerce. With e-commerce, you literally have the ability to get any food product from anywhere in the world at any time. And so with e-commerce, the number of SKUs continue to grow. And so just think of the complexities of managing food safety in this kind of food system. How about global food production? Talk about the food system changing. What do we know? That we're going to reach about 9 billion people by 2050. That's in 35 short years. You've heard it reported that we're going to have to produce as much food over the next 30 years that's been produced over all of mankind. Is that a daunting figure? Over the next 30 years, we got to produce as much food that's been produced from the beginning of time. Food system is changing. And we know we can't produce our way out of this. We've got to reduce food waste. And so this is just, we'll have to double, triple food production, and we have to reduce food waste. Here's another trend in terms of how the food system is changing. There was a time in my life when food used to unite us. I grew up in New York and Florida, and we rallied behind hot dogs and apple pie and baseball and Chevrolets. And you know, the food system brought us together as a country. But now what does food do? Food is dividing us. You know that. All you have to do is get on the internet or read the newspapers. And so now you have people that want local food, and some people say, I'm okay with global food. I happen to be pro-global and pro-local, where all of the world feeds the rest of the world. The debate over organic and conventional. I don't know where you stand. Natural versus processed. And what does natural mean? Too much food and too little food. For the first time in our civilization, too much food is causing as much disease as too little food. Pretty interesting. And here's the last point in terms of how the food system is changing. And I shared this with some students last night. There was a time in my life when I had hope in food science, and a lot of us as Americans did, right? We marveled in food science and the innovations and our ability to use science to feed a growing population. But now what do we see? People a little afraid of science, right? And I don't want science in my food. It's okay if it's on my iPad. It's okay if it's on my iPhone. But in my food, I don't want science in my food, right? And that's a challenge I think we have to think about and use specifically as future food safety leaders have to help resolve in society. And so let me just sum up my comments on the changing food system with this quote. Never before in history has the responsibility to provide safe and affordable food to so many rested on the shoulders of so few. Think about that. And never before have the so many had opinions about how the so few should do it. And they're far removed from production, but they have opinions on what you should be doing, right? All you have to do is pick up any blog or get on Twitter and you'll see that. And never before have the consequences for not getting this right been more important, right? And so the food system is changing and it's presenting some unique challenges. The second trend I wanted to talk to you about is foodborne disease surveillance. I don't have to spend a lot of time persuading you that food safety awareness is at an all-time high. These are just some outbreaks that have been recorded in the news. Let me get this. And the reason I want to share this is there was a time when you would see these type of landmark events pretty infrequently. Some of us were talking about in the 90s, the Jack in the Box outbreak was the outbreak that really put, I think, food safety on the map in the United States. And those things happen once every 10 years, once every 5 years. But if you look at these and some more recent ones, what does that tell you? They're happening every other month? Now, why is that the case? I'm not convinced that our food supply is less safe today than it's ever been. In fact, I think our food supply today is safer than it's ever been. But these outbreaks are being documented more frequently than in the past. These are the estimates of foodborne disease, 48 million cases, 3,000 deaths, you know that. About 1 in 6 Americans will experience a foodborne disease annually. That's the same rate in most developed countries around the world, 1 in 6, 1 in 4. What do these three things have in common? And I need to update the slide, but PFGE stands for Pulse Field Gel Electrophoresis, our ability to do genetic fingerprints, credit cards, and Google. What do these three things have in common? What's that?
Surveillance.
Surveillance, very good, astute. And somebody told me PFG is old technology. You ought to replace it with whole genome sequencing. It was innovative 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Now we can sequence the whole genome of an organism for about 20 bucks. But you're absolutely dead on. They'll improve our ability to detect foodborne disease, and that's what's changing. The PCA outbreak, at the top, you see the genetic fingerprint. That outbreak, if you go back and read it, it was an outbreak of Salmonella typhimurium. There was a couple of cases in a couple of states. Now, when I went through public health training, Salmonella typhimurium, a couple of cases over a couple of months in a couple of states, people would say, hey, that's background noise. You always have a couple of cases of Salmonella typhimurium going on, and you wouldn't pay attention. But what do we do now? We do genetic fingerprints. We put it on the information highway. We send it to DC and say, whoa, these 3 cases, not a lot in terms of the global scale, but these 3 cases have something in common. And by the time we were all said and done, it was 800, 900 cases of Salmonella, multiple deaths. And in my view, the main reason why we got the Food Safety Modernization Act. When it happened, there hadn't been PFGE. That outbreak could have happened 10 years ago, and we'd be sitting in this room, and we wouldn't have known it happened. So that's changing. Credit cards. This is an outbreak that occurred in Denmark, where some people were getting ill with the particular strain of E. coli. Danish epidemiologists, just a few years ago, didn't know what was causing the illnesses. But somebody came up with a clever idea that said, let's look at what consumers were buying using their credit card records. And using credit card records, they found out that most of the people that were ill had purchased a particular brand of sausage. They tested the sausage, and lo and behold, same outbreak strain in sausage as in patients, outbreak solved because of credit cards. And in our country, in some cases, we have loyalty cards. If you're a Sam's Club member, we have a record of what you purchased, and you see outbreaks being solved in this country because of loyalty or membership cards. The last outbreak, this university in particular has done some really good research on Listeria and deli meats. This was the maple leaf outbreak in Canada. Many of you have heard of it, large outbreak Listeria deaths. Some researchers went back and looked at that outbreak retrospectively, looking backwards, and they published a paper that said, hey, had we been searching for what Canadian consumers were searching on search engines such as Google, we might have detected the outbreak long before traditional health reporting. And so society is pretty connected these days, and you have a lot of streams of information and data, and they're all leading to enhanced ability to detect foodborne illness. I thought at irrelevancy, but I'll do this in a respectful manner. I'll just talk about one that's in the newspapers today. Bluebell. You may have seen today, Bluebell announced that they're recalling all products, all plants nationwide. Now here's a company that's been in existence 108 years with a safe record. Many of you probably enjoy Bluebell ice cream products. 108 years, and then this year they get linked to an outbreak. Now, do you think their practice has changed all of a sudden today? Or last month? What's changed? Foodborne disease surveillance. I actually have been saying that I think this outbreak is a landmark outbreak that will go down in the history books as one that will reveal a lot about our ability to detect foodborne illness. And I've titled this one, I just put the slide together this morning, literally, Food Safety is Not What It Used to Be. Let me ask you, let me test your attentiveness this morning. What do you see on this slide that looks different to you? For those of you that have looked at epidemic curves is a term that we use in foodborne disease investigations. We plot time on the x-axis, the number of cases on the y-axis, and then you see an outbreak peak generally, right? What's different about this one? This is very informative. When have you ever seen an epidemic curve that lasts 4 years? Generally, it's months. When have you seen an outbreak occur, get detected here, and they can solve cases that occurred 4 years ago? This sounds like CSI, doesn't it? Outbreak today, and you look back and say there were illnesses linked to this outbreak 4 years ago? If that doesn't wake up and get your attention, nothing will. And what else? Not a lot of cases, right? What is it, 8 cases in total? And none of this would have happened if it were not for whole genome sequencing. In fact, if you talk to the regulators, and I have, this wouldn't have been picked up with PFGE. So PFGE is old technology. Just because we can sequence the whole genetic genome of an organism, we have this type of specificity. It's pretty interesting. What else? There's one last thing that you should be asking yourself. It's an ice cream product. Do you think of that as a risky product? What do you think or know about the infectious dose of listeria? What do people generally say the infectious dose for listeria is? Pretty high. That's what's reported in the literature. Well, this outbreak will go down in the record books of an outbreak that caused listeriosis with very low infectious dose. Very low infectious dose. And so this is a paradigm changer, folks. And if you're in the industry, you ought to be saying, oh my goodness, what does this mean to me? I'll tell you what this means. This is an analogy I've been using, and every year that I use it, it becomes more relevant. And following the Bluebell illustration, it's even more relevant today than it was a month ago. All of us are in this race, and if you're a food manufacturer, you are certainly in this race. And the race is between our ability to detect foodborne illnesses with the innovations that are happening like whole genome sequencing and foodborne disease surveillance, and our ability to prevent. And it feels to me, I don't know about to you, I staggered these pictures this way on purpose, that society is losing the race of prevention against detection, right? We're getting better at detecting at a more rapid rate than our ability to prevent. And so my encouragement to you is, as whether you're students, whether you're in regulatory, whether you're in industry, we have to accelerate prevention. Or else consumers are going to see these outbreaks in the news, they're going to see these recalls, and they're going to think, oh my goodness, the sky is falling. The food system is less safe today than it's ever been. When in reality, we're getting really good at detecting these. And so we have to accelerate prevention with the lessons that we learned through detection. Make sense? What's my second trend? Let me move on to the third one, globalization. And let me begin with another question. What does SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, you guys remember SARS, caused by coronavirus, melamine, and tiramisu have in common? What's that? International? Good? They're all examples of what I call rapid, extremely rapid globalization. Tom Frieden said the world is flat. The world is also becoming very fast. SARS, caused by coronavirus. It traveled from Hong Kong to Canada at, how long did it take? How long is the flight? 14 hours? In the 14th century, Black plague caused by Yersinia pestis is documented to have traveled across Europe from southern Europe to northern Europe at the rate of 2 miles a day. So you think about an infectious disease moving at 2 miles a day. Not very rapid, right? What do you have the ability now? Infectious diseases travel around the world in hours. An example of rapid globalization. As long as foodborne disease exists somewhere in the world, It exists anywhere in the world. Melamine, you remember that? That we saw how a contaminated food item can get around the world pretty quickly. And then the last one is tiramisu. Tiramisu, well, you might think, what in the world does tiramisu have to do with globalization? Well, I told you I worked at the Disney theme parks. We took a tiramisu made at one of our resorts, and we said, where do the ingredients come from? And we looked at the ingredients, and we saw that the cocoa powder came from Switzerland, the chocolate from Belgium, the cream from the United States, mascarpone cheese from Italy, from Mexico, mint leaf from the United States, roasted espresso beans from Colombia, vanilla beans from Madagascar. And this simple dessert, which if you're sitting down to eat it, you're just enjoying it and say it's fabulous, I hope it doesn't have too many calories. But you find out it has 41,000 food miles, an international dessert. And I would assure you that there's items that you're going to be eating this week, whether it's in restaurants or at home, that are international in nature, and you haven't really paused to reflect and think about this. Rapid globalization. All these ingredients up here, which one concerns you the most? Which one? The cream from the United States. Ah. Who else? The cinnamon? The cinnamon powder. So spice and seasoning guy. Okay. Anyone else? The cheese. It's interesting how, here we have a group of prestigious food science and food safety professionals, and you all have a different answer. There was a time when people would gravitate to particular ingredients, but today, because outbreaks are involving so many food products, people are saying them all. I was really concerned about this little mint leaf, and none of you answered that. Because of testing, you did? Okay, we had somebody pick up on the mint leaf, but they're all legit. They're all great answers. But we were concerned about that mint leaf because some testing we had done in the Disney laboratory had repeatedly found salmonella in mint leaf. Now, I've never seen an outbreak documented with mint leaf, but I have isolated salmonella on mint leaf a lot. Now, if we ate this dessert, if afterwards we did a reception and we all ate this tiramisu, and tomorrow a lot of us started getting ill, how many in the health department called you and said, hey, we understand you were at the event, you got ill? How many of you would say, I think it's that darn mint leaf that got me ill? Probably not, right? Might point it to the lunch or to the dessert, but not the mint leaf. It's one of those ingredients we call stealth ingredients. But the moral of this story is that we need to move beyond traceability. We're talking a lot about traceability. We need to move to transparency. And you need to know where things come from, but more importantly, how they're produced. And so with that, the world is getting smaller and outbreaks are getting larger. And so that's the third trend, rapid globalization. And how do you manage food safety risk in this type of society? And some people will say, well, the solution is local, right? Forget this global stuff. We're going to go back to local. Is local safer? Do you think local is safer? Doesn't matter if it's global or local, right? You still have to make it safe. And this is an example. Remember that E. coli outbreak I told you in Germany? The world's largest E. coli outbreak? Small local producer in Germany. Local producer caused illnesses there, and guess what? I think it was in 12 plus different countries because people were in a small local region consuming contaminated sprouts, and they went back home and took illnesses home with them all the way as far as the US and Canada. All right, the fourth trend, ingredients. If you didn't pick up, my last name is Yiannas. It's a Greek name, and so Greeks are known for being very proud of their heritage, and so I usually manage to slip in a little Greek story. Do you know who this is? Achilles, the mighty warrior Achilles. Very good. So you're not only teaching them food science, but you're teaching them history and Greek mythology. No, this really happened. But Greek mythology says that when Achilles was born, his parents wanted to give him invincible powers. And if you've ever studied or read it, they allegedly dipped him in the Styx River by holding onto his Achilles heel. And this gave him some incredible warrior-like powers, but he had a vulnerability, right? The heel. And we all know the moral of the story. But the reason I like to use this is because I think it's a good analogy for the food system today. And what we've seen is some food producers that think they're pretty good. They've got some pretty good strong armor on their food safety management systems, and they've got vice presidents of food safety. But we've also seen that they have an Achilles heel. And the Achilles heel often has been, in these outbreaks that we've seen retrospectively, ingredients. Simple example, PCA, company that produced about 2 to 3% of the peanut paste. But because they had a contaminated ingredient, peanut paste, what happened? Dominoes fell with some of these mighty warriors quite easily. And what we saw was recalls associated with peanuts, peanut butter crackers, granola bars, ice cream, pet food treats, cookies, chocolates. By the time this one was all said and done, 3,900 products recalled because of a small ingredient supplier that produced 3% of the peanut paste in this country. Pretty interesting, huh? And you might say, hey, Frank, that's a worst case scenario. You're just exaggerating. Went back and looked at some outbreaks that the CDC reports. Multi-state outbreaks a few years ago, when we went back and looked at it, we saw that 50% of all outbreaks were ingredient driven. So the moral of this story is the ingredients matter. And remember, I told you it's not just about traceability, it's about transparency. You ought to know what's going in your products. And so what does that mean for food manufacturers? They got to understand the risks with their products, go beyond traceability. I told you it's about transparency. Additional interventions. We see cookie dough manufacturers now wanting to heat treat flour because they know people are going to eat cookie dough raw. And sometimes reformulation. We've also seen companies reformulating to try to make their products safer just through formulation. All right, fifth trend, social media. Now you might say, this is a little bit untraditional. The food safety guy is going to talk to us about social media. Do you believe social media has played a role in toppling governments? Yes? If you believe it can topple governments, do you think it has a role in food safety? Absolutely has a role in food safety. And so I'm not just trying to be cute with the latest trend. Social media is having a profound effect and impact on food safety. It allows food safety concerns to spread at the speed of light. It allows what crisis managers say a small flame to turn into a forest fire within a day or 2 days. You don't have time to react. And this is the example. We talked earlier today in a meeting about lean, fine textured beef, also referred to as pink slime. And you guys are probably familiar with that. When some consumer groups and blogs and emails and tweets started going around about there's pink slime in the ground beef, how that went viral. And in a matter of days, most retailers were saying, okay, we're no longer going to accept ground beef that has lean, finely textured beef on it. Although it was perfectly safe, consumers rejected it, it went viral and became a big alleged food safety issue overnight. And so you might think, well, that's a negative consequence of social media. There's real positive consequences too. Let me kind of illustrate it through this surveillance pyramid. This is how we were taught about foodborne disease surveillance when I was going to school. We said, hey, there's the population. It's something called the surveillance pyramid. Population, if you eat a contaminated food product, not everybody's going to become ill, but a certain percentage will. It's an attack rate. Of those that become ill, not everybody's going to seek medical care. Of those that seek medical care, not everybody's going to get tested for the right organism. So for every reported case, it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of cases unreported. Have you seen the surveillance pyramid? You're familiar with this, okay? Social media has the ability to turn the surveillance pyramid, in my view, on its head. Just change the paradigm. It really is. It turns it on its head. Because what you could do now is rather than looking for the one rare reported case that's been laboratory confirmed, you could monitor the population constantly using structured sources of data and unstructured sources of data. And this is what it looks like. You have somebody, the population, that's consuming products, but you can monitor what they're searching on search engines such as Google. You could see what they're posting on dining reviews, on their dining experience, and whether they said it was good or bad and they got sick. Here's the traditional tip of the pyramid. We're waiting on the laboratory confirmed cases. You can monitor what they're doing on Twitter and Facebook. You can monitor what they're buying using credit cards or membership cards. You can see, and there's a lot more sources. You've heard big data? Big data is real, and it has the potential to change the prevention and detection paradigm. And so this is what it looks like. How many of you have heard epidemiology? Everyone? How many of you have heard infodemiology? No hands? A few have. But this is what infodemiology looks like, and this is what the future could conceivably look like. What you see here is the epidemic curve, again, time and the number of cases. But what you see is, usually when you get that one reported case, laboratory confirmed case, what do we know? The outbreak is generally over. Because by the time somebody's been sick enough to go to the doctor, get the case, and it gets reported back, the outbreak is well into its epidemic curve. But if you're searching for what people are doing on social networking sites, internet blogging, it occurs much earlier in the epidemic curve. And internet searches, as I told you earlier with the maple leaf outbreak, they said, hey, it shows up really early in the epidemic curve. And that study said if we'd been searching for what Canadians were searching with terms such as listeriosis on Google, it would have solved the outbreak. And if you think, hey, that's just one outbreak, this was a report that came out of Harvard and the New York City Health Department that said by searching what people were posting on Yelp, a dining review app, they solved outbreaks in New York City that had gone unreported. And so the future is now big data and information technology will be used to solve outbreaks that had previously gone unreported. And here's my last trend, and then I'll wrap it up and we'll do some Q&A. And I was talking to a group of thought leaders earlier before I came in here. It's the criminalization of food safety, what I call the criminalization of food safety, one that I think you need to be aware of. Peanut Corporation of America. Within the past 14 months, there have been 3 criminal trials on food contaminated events. This was the PCA, the Parnell brothers, and you know what happened to them. They were charged, I think one of the Parnell brothers had over 40 federal counts alleging they falsified records because they knew the product was contaminated and they falsified it to get negative results. And they misled investigators. To make a long story short, lots of criminal prosecutions, fines, and punishment for these guys. Now, some people think, fine, they're bad actors. They deserved it, and I don't disagree with you. These are the Jensen brothers. You're familiar with the cantaloupe outbreak, right? Listeria. The Jensen brothers were actually brought into court with shackles, like criminals. There were 146 cases, 33 deaths. And you know what happened here? They got charged, not because they intentionally withheld information or falsified lab results, but they got charged because Listeria on cantaloupes was a known foreseeable hazard that they should have anticipated. Now, they got criminally charged for that. One can debate whether that was criminal intention or not, but they were charged. And then just last week, there was another outbreak in the news, the DeCoster brothers with eggs contaminated, and they were criminally charged. And so there is this increase, and I can assure you now with success with some criminal prosecutions in the federal courts, you'll see more criminalization of food safety in future outbreaks. You, as a food safety professional, and certainly those of you that are food producers, ought to wake up, take note, and pay attention. So what have I shared? Changing food system, foodborne disease surveillance, globalization of food safety, ingredients, social media, criminalization. I could have added to this list. I could have added, the changing demographics, at-risk population, emerging pathogens, but I limited to these. But what do they mean? There are unique challenges to food safety for us today. And that's why I wanted to be here. Because you, as future leaders, need to know what these challenges are so that you can go out there and help us solve them. There are no silver bullets, but there are solutions for each and every one of these, I'm convinced. Clearly, we need a bigger conversation about food safety, and you guys are doing that. This session today is, look at this, a room full of people talking about food safety and the solutions needed for the future. We need all stakeholders around the table. Food safety requires more collaboration than ever before. The food system is pretty complex. And there is no single company, no single university, no single regulatory agency that can solve these challenges alone. So it has to be collaborative in nature. So I'm going to close with just some thoughts on the way forward. Now, they're going to be less traditional because I could easily stood up here and you say, okay, so Frank, now you're going to talk to us about HACCP, you're going to talk to us about regulations, you're going to talk to us about the Global Food Safety Initiative, GFSI, good risk assessments. Any of you could come down here and do that, right? So I'm going to give you some perspectives that are a little different. One, I told you, we have to accelerate prevention. Accelerate prevention. Just because you did food safety this way for the past 108 years doesn't mean it's right. And in today's environment that's changing, if it's wrong, it's going to be increasingly likely detected. That's a challenge, because if you just think about human behavior and social psychology, if you've done it one way for 108 years and it's been fine, why do I have to change? You have to change because the world is changing. And so you have to accelerate prevention. And we all need to be advocates for accelerating prevention. Remain science and risk-based. At the end of the day, everything we do needs to be science-based. And so make sure that you use science to appropriate and to focus in what you're going to do. You have to, as future leaders of food safety, become really astute at managing real risk and perceived risk. And the reason I want to make that point with the students in particular, and some of you that have been around the profession for a while, you'll agree with me, When we were trained, we were really focused on just the real risk of food safety. You know, if it was a real public health issue, we were really focused on it. And if it was a perceived issue, we were food safety purists. We weren't really concerned about that. Oh, that's a perceived risk, it's not legitimate. But with social media and people offering opinions out there, I think today more than ever, we have to manage both real and perceived risk. And I will guarantee you that you, as the future leaders of food safety, when you enter the profession, you'll be managing perception quite a bit. And so develop skills, acquire skills that allow you to do both, manage real and perceived risk. Managing perceived risk means you got to be credible, you need to be trusted, you need to be a good communicator, you need to know how you influence others, and so you have to do both. You have to manage real and perceived risk. I think, remember I showed you that there's been dramatic improvements in food safety over the most greater part of the 1900s, and then I told you we've stalled. One of the reasons I think we've stalled is we're trying to run the old plays. The plays that worked in the 1950s, and the plays that worked in the 1960s, and the 1970s. But the challenges we face today are different. And so we need specific priorities and strategies, not these generic ones. You can't just say, everybody have a HACCP plan. That sounds great. We want everybody to have a HACCP plan. But I'm a believer that you really need to go after pathogen product combinations. And you've seen some of the initiatives our company has rolled out have been very targeted to specific pathogens and products, whether it was our beef safety initiative or our produce safety initiative. It's so very specific. Look at some challenges or problems that are occurring in society today and go after and solve them with specific strategies rather than generic plans. Collaborate and innovate. I don't have to say a lot, but innovation is critical. I do believe that we're not having enough innovation, and it's impossible to change without innovations. I wanted to pause here because this isn't one commonly discussed in our profession. We talk about food safety management systems, right, and food safety managers, and most of you get hired as managers. But we need great food safety management and more food safety leadership. Management and leadership are different. And as in the profession, we don't talk about leadership. I did a Google search, and when you find hits on food safety leaders, they're awards. They're not real principles on how do you teach people to be food safety. Managers work in the system. Leaders work on the system. And I'm saying we need more work on the system. And so I hope that you'll be future global food safety leaders and not just managers. And then one of the things that I'm known for is we have to create a food safety culture and not just food safety programs. The criminalization of food safety is happening because we don't have a strong enough culture in some businesses and in some portions of the food system. A culture allows you to do things that are right because you're responsible for food safety and you care about others. Criminalization occurs because the government wants to hold you accountable because you're not doing the right things. And the reason I'm concerned a little bit about focusing strictly on accountability, what happens with accountability when somebody's not watching? People might be willing to take a risk. But if it's a culture, people will be responsible even when no one is watching. And so as future food safety leaders, I really want you to understand and master concepts of not only accountability, but making people responsible for food safety. In closing, let me tell you, I think the future of food safety is at a real crossroads. I really genuinely believe this, and I'm not trying to be dramatic here. And we can choose to go down the path that we've done for the past 100 years and use some of those methods that we've used, or we can choose to innovate and take a different path. There are outbreaks right around the corner, big outbreaks, next month, next year, 5 years from now. And the decisions that you make here in this audience will determine whether some of these outbreaks come to fruition or whether they get prevented. So with that, I want to thank you for listening, and I want to thank OSU for the invitation and all that you're doing along with the industry partners and the future food safety leaders to provide safe and affordable food so people can live better. Thank you very much.